look back with pride in how this agreement charted the proper course for the future growth issues that we'll all encounter. So with that, welcome to Sebastian, and I think what we'll do is, like we did the last time, we will do a roll call going through the council, of each council, and if we'll do it the way it's put down here, we'll be first, then Vero Beach, Ellesmere, Indian River Shores, Orchid, and then Indian River County will be last. They were first. You guys were first last time, so the first are now last, okay? So, my name is Richard Gilmore. I'm the mayor.
Jim Hill, Vice Mayor.
Andrea Coy, Council Member.
Dale Simchek, Council Member.
And our staff is? And we'll go to Vero now. Mayor? Mayor Abel?
Save Abel, Mayor.
Bill Fish, Council Member.
I'm Kevin Sonnet, Council Member.
Tom White, Vice Mayor.
Deborah Froman, Council Member.
And our staff, Charlie Vitunic, Tim McGarry.
Okay, and Fellsmere?
Mayor, Susan Adams is running a little bit late. I guess she's cooking supper over at Marsh Landing, so she's got to get the meals out. But I'm Joel Tyson, the Vice Mayor.
Fernando Herrera.
Let's see. Sarah can't make it, and our staff.
Wardale, City Attorney.
Thank you. And now, Indian River Shores.
Tom Cadden, Mayor of Indian River Shores.
Bill Kenyon, Vice Mayor.
Franny Atchison, Council Member.
And we've lost Bradshaw. Where is he? There he is. Robert Bradshaw, Town Manager.
Now we're to Orchid.
Richard Gallant, Mayor.
Suzanne Joyce, Vice Mayor.
Paul Johnson, Council Member.
Wesley Davis, Indian River County.
Joe Flesher, Indian River County. Bob Solari, Indian River County.
Peter O'Brien, Indian River County.
Gary Wheeler, Indian River County.
And we have, I see, our County Attorney, Mr. Will Collins.
Okay. They do that all the time, don't they?
The mayor got me.
And I didn't see our city clerk, Tammy Vaught.
And the rest of the county staff, I'm Bob Keating, County Community Development Director.
George Glenn, Assistant County Attorney.
And I forgot the most important person who set all this up is our clerk, Sally Mayo. Thank you very much, Sally. And Jeanette and staff. So, Mr. Minner, would you give us, you know what we forgot to do? Pledge of Allegiance. Let's stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. I told you I was new.
We get MIS is loading our PowerPoint here. Give me just 1 second. We ready to go? Oh, there you go. Hey, again, a welcome. Many of you may have already seen this PowerPoint, but what we thought would be appropriate to do was, again, kind of recap, since it's been since July, since we've all been here. And actually, Bob Keating gave this presentation to the County Commission about 2 weeks ago. So I asked for Bob to send this over to us. We've modified it a little bit to try to keep it a little more neutral and less county-centric, but I'm sure Bob will get to those points here pretty quick. But other than the non-neutral county view on this, Bob did do a pretty concise history, and so I thought it'd be good to recap for everybody here. So this is today, the Interlocal Service Boundary Agreement, December 15th. What is an SBA? ISBA. Bob starts out with, it's the authorized by Florida statutes. It's Section 171, Part 2, so I'm sure we've said that more than one time. It's an agreement between a county and one or more municipalities addressing issues such as service delivery and municipal annexations. The intent is to promote intergovernmental coordination in planning, service delivery, and municipal boundary adjustments. For our background, this kind of started with Fellsmere and their annexations, where they had a large-scale annexations of over 20,000 acres. And in kind of reaction, or as a result, or however that happened there, the BCC, the Board of County Commissioners, initiated efforts to establish a charter. And then, kind of in response to that, we came up with the alternative proposal here to do the ISBA as an alternative to a county charter. So this group has met now. This is, I guess, your third time. The history, again, before we get to that slide, we've got the Fellsmere adopted the initiating resolution by 171 Part 2 back in April of 2007, kind of which invited us all to the party which you're here at tonight. In May, the county and the other municipalities responded back. And then in June, we adopted, each of the municipalities and county adopted what was kind of locally known as the stand down, where no more annexations, or we wouldn't change height or density outside the urban service area for up to a year. So we started development on this, and the county and the municipal reps have met now for the last year. We've been meeting about twice a month. And the representative from the groups have basically been the managers or administrators and the attorneys and the planners. And that is the group that drafted the document that's before you tonight. Now, this is where I was jumping ahead to. This group has now met, this is your third time. Our first joint meeting was at the Richardson Center back in June. We met here back in August, and then this meeting this evening, which makes the third. The adoption process is hopefully what is to come next, or shortly thereafter, where each of the parties will review the agreement at a public meeting, and then a majority vote of each of the jurisdictions approves the agreement, and then the agreement ultimately is recorded. The components of the agreement are basically two major components. One is annexation, and the other is land use. And then that breaks down into categories of how those processes work inside the urban service area and outside. And then, of course, that repeats itself for the land uses as well. And then, of course, as always, there's exceptions. The biggest part of, probably in my opinion at least, of the document, or one of the main components, is what we refer to as the ISBA map, which is Exhibit A. And it identifies each municipality's annexation reserve area. A municipality cannot annex going forward outside of that reserve area. And Fellsmere and Sebastian are the only municipalities that have a reserve area outside the urban service area. And then the reduction in size of the reserve areas from the first map. So that was kind of the history. I thought it was a good history of kind of when we first started. That's kind of how we first drew up the map. And then it metamorphosized into what you see there. Now, just, as a joke, kind of, I'm a middle kid. I grew up, I'm the middle of five. And so, we generally we don't get real boisterous about kind of the things that we do. But if you did notice that blue of Sebastian stayed pretty much the same the whole way through the process. So we think that points to our reasonability and how we came to the table. So we just wanted to point that out. you want me to show you those 3 slides again? Anyway, moving along. Another important component of the committee is obviously the USAC. The USAC is a committee which is comprised of 1 elected representative from each party, and they will review most annexations and land use changes. And then we speak to unanimous agreement of the parties that are required in the agreement to change land uses or heightened densities and changes to the county's urban service area. And then again, some of the exceptions are the future land use map amendment does not increase heightened density for county designations, small-scale amendments where property consists of platted lots. County and Fellsmere have allowances for new towns, which is Exhibit E, and then Sebastian's reserve area has some exceptions, which is Exhibit D. So with that, that's item 4 on the agenda. If you want, how we set up the agenda was then for each jurisdiction to kind of go through and hit some of the areas of our concern that I know our elected officials wanted to discuss, and then move through each of the jurisdictions and then kind of turn it over to the elected officials for you all to kind of give us direction again. So, Mayor, if you don't mind, and if everybody's okay with that, I'll just move into our issues.
Is that fine with everybody? Fine. Okay.
Well, the city of Sebastian, I think, and I'm happy to report that we're very close, I think, and happy with where the process has gone to date. I think we have 3 specific issues. One is the one that we brought up of the point-to-point annexation or contiguity, and I'll touch on that in a second. The next is the new town locations. And this kind of went hand in hand with the contiguity issue, because when we brought that to the last work group meeting, 1 got approved, kind of 1 didn't. Our issue there was we felt like because of growth issues around Sebastian and because of some of those perspectives that we had with the WEC, we felt like we needed some exception from 171, those annexation regs, so that we could get down in some of the areas that were inside of our reserve area. But also in that, we also wanted to see that new towns kind of stayed away from some of our city limits. And the mix of that was we kind of have some language that was put in on new towns that I know the county wasn't real happy with, but also the new town language got added back in. So I know our elected officials want to visit the new town issue. Also, a couple of our members have also requested that some other discussions on other services like water, sewer, transportation, or those type of things be talked about. And we talked about those in the work group, and from the work group position, I think we all kind of felt that those were really hard issues to get a grapple on in this issue, and we felt like those land use issues needed to be discussed primarily. But I know our folks wanted to talk about that. To offer some guidance, or at least a resolution, I met, along with Rebecca, with George Glenn last week to talk about some of the point-to-point issues. And I think what we would like to put on the table, and it's a shade variant from what we discussed with George, was to identify by tax parcels some of the areas that we were concerned with on a contiguity basis. And before you is that. They're mostly Graves properties, which are marked in green, which are all in the WEC, and then we labeled the ones in yellow. And from our perspective, as you see, you know, if those are annexed, or the yellow parcels we've talked about here more recently, that those could be areas that made a lot of sense for the city to annex. And that's where we think that, you know, if you look at this in the bigger spectrum and you look at this in the context of what the cities have given up for the restrictions of annexation, the point-to-point issue really works well and makes a lot of sense, at least from our perspective. So instead of the language of the point-to-point, what we would be willing to see is to put in an exhibit that says, that exempts us from 171 and then refers to the map. At least from my perspective, when we had those discussions, as we tried to pinpoint some of these locations, it became kind of cumbersome. and that led to the point-to-point language, which is now in the agreement. But what we would be happy to do is strike the point-to-point language and say that Sebastian would be exempted from those regulations, and then refer to the map. So with that, I think that's all that Sebastian has to offer at this time. And Bob, do you want to hit those 2 points? Yeah. Or, yeah, we'll do, Rebecca will get you some. Yeah, we'll try to hit the lights, and then Rebecca is going to print some of those up. That really helped, huh? Those properties in the red are Barnes Grove and the Davis property, kind of from west to east on the top row. You with me? Yeah. And then on the bottom, Hammond property, Davis property, and then Davis property. So Davis property is this L. Barnes is the center, and then that lower left corner is Hammond. Up here we go. And then, okay, the blue, we just wanted to highlight these for a couple of different reasons. One, which I think is the county perspective, is just to give the graves areas. But then that created some enclaves. And then this is down here on the bottom. So from our perspective, what we tried to get across was, look, if Sebastian's going to develop the WEC, I was looking for a microphone. You know, we felt like it would be fair for some exemptions from 171. And I think when you look at those holistically, you know, those properties all fit together and they all have common purpose, and they're all within the reserve area. So in a sense, we kind of felt like at the last there, we had a reserve area, and the most important area for Sebastian's reserve area, you know, potentially we've exempted ourselves out of getting into those areas for development or potential growth, which defeats the purpose of the WEC. And then the two yellow parcels, you know, obviously, we don't think we have contiguity issues there. Blue Water Bay, you know, that came up in discussion recently, as well as the Hess property and the Russell property. And we'll get those maps out. Has everybody? And I see the one floating in the back now. Okay.
Oh, Bob? Okay. I know that we had some, Councilmember Simchek, did you have some issues with the new towns last time, or?
Yes, I was going to say Councilmember Coy did. I believe our attorney was going to check with we had some problems with, in our group meeting, we had a discussion regarding traffic concurrency and water, and I just wanted to say as a council member, you know, I'll see things in the paper like this is the final meeting or we're almost done, and I really don't feel that. I feel that we are working towards, you know, everybody's using good language, we're working towards a common goal. But from our council meeting, we've had some issues, and we're talking about how important they are to actually resolve it. We did enter the interlocal in good faith. That doesn't mean all 5 of us will sign it, and where we'll go is depends on how these issues work out. But we will talk in a positive manner. As I said, water was a very important issue from the start for me, and I believe that's one thing that we wanted to talk about. We talked about traffic concurrency recently. We had a problem with Liberty Park and the city of Sebastian not being on the traffic concurrency. If we did go up to traffic concurrency and spend a lot of money to go into the county's concurrency maps, then we create a open or black hole over into the Fellsmere area. So some of our thoughts at our last meeting was going as a county concurrency, and a thought of maybe futuristically discussing going with traffic concurrency as a whole. But I'll turn the mic over to Councilmember Coy because I believe she had some issues with Newtowns.
Yeah, and actually, Mr. Minner stated the position quite well. It was brought up before. When we originally started with new towns, the language said that they would not be within 5 miles of a current municipality, and we've changed that language and reduced it down. I still of the mindset that the 5-mile limit is something we need to do to protect our boundaries, because building a new town on top of a current town doesn't make a lot of sense. And so that's, Mr. Minner brought that up, and I'm hoping that we can negotiate that as a group to go back to the 5-mile limit.
Are we done? I guess we're done. Next would be Vero Beach. You're up.
Charlie and Tim.
I think Vero Beach has only 2 minor problems. One is the mention of Citrus Highway in Sebastian's Western Employment Center. It uses it almost as a description of a location, but our city finds that the existence of that highway has not been determined yet, and would argue against its being built, and therefore does not want it mentioned in this agreement. We do not have a problem, according to the council vote, with the point-to-point issue that Al just explained. We do have a problem with something that wasn't even in the slideshow, Exhibit F, which is Fellsmere's description of how it plans to develop the 20,000 acres. Our position is, if I can speak for the planner, I'll ask him to further up, is that the DCA is looking at that issue right now and will very likely come down with a different set of regulations. And although we don't know what they are now, we believe that there'll be something we could live with a lot better than we can live with what there is now. And Tim and Gary, our planner here, is if there's any more to say.
I know it's kind of the cow's out of the barn on this one, on Exhibit F, but it's still going through the process, and I know that Sebastian and the county did respond, and there was a negative objections came down from the state DCA on the plan amendments, and I think our city is encouraging the participants to work together on resolving some of these issues. I think that's one way to meet the problems that we see in Exhibit F, recognizing that we, as I said, the cows left the barn.
And one final comment, Dale Simchek's comment about water, sewer, and all those other issues. We believe that this agreement will have all those issues discussed under the USAC annexation review. Virtually everything that happens will go to staff review before USAC, and that's the forum for the technicians and people like that to get together and bring a report to the elected officials on how the annexation will affect the service provision. And we have the final comment Vero Beach has. This has not been taken to the city council yet because we just thought about it Friday, is that we believe Exhibits D, E, and F, which are the exceptions for Fellsmere, Sebastian, and the County Newtowns, should all be taken to USAC for at least comment. Rather, it doesn't have to be mandatory action, but we believe that the review of USAC on all applications using Exhibits D, E, and F should have some sort of official review. And that was not voted on by the council, but I believe it would be something they could support.
Thank you. Fellsmere, you're up next. Jason?
Thank you. It's good to be here. I think from our perspective, we feel like we've been working on this agreement really since 2005. I guess we'll give another unbiased perspective on the context of this agreement. Really, if you go back and you look at the issues we had, first requesting a joint planning agreement with the county, that was refuted. Then you had the action of the county commission looking for a special act of the legislature through an ordinance. Then you had the charter. Then you had the denial of land use amendments that were initially approved by the county staff, by the commission, and subsequently denied. That was the genesis of where we are now as far as the ISBA. So I think, from our perspective, we've tried to come to a workable format. And I think this agreement is the result of that, and we've been at it for over 12 months. I think it's a workable agreement. I don't think anybody's particularly happy with it. I think whether you're pro-growth, anti-growth, no matter what side you take on it, you've got some frustration with it. I know we've put a lot into it, staff's put a lot into it, and I think just the interaction between staff has been very beneficial. But, as far as moving forward, I think when we discussed it with council, their opinion was we're ready to move forward. There may be some minor tweaks to be done, Exhibit F being one of those areas where we've taken it a little bit further since we've last visited it. And to respond to Vera Beach's concerns regarding DCA's comments, when you're processing land use amendments of that scope, typically there are going to be issues that come up. But I would say we've been subjected to a level of scrutiny that heretofore few cities have been subjected to. We have the implementation of House Bill 697 that has not been properly promulgated by DCA. That has been, I think, further refined because of the questions that we have raised. We are participating in that, and that has to do with sustainability measures, economic, I should say, energy conservation. There's another word I'm looking for that escapes me right now, but basically the efficient land use patterns that they're trying to develop. Sprawl. We've tightened up the sprawl issues. And one of the biggest issues has been the needs analysis, which DCA has taken a much more stringent perspective on, which we're fully prepared to deal with DCA on. And I think since county staff in particular has felt some vindication from DCA that once we do get approval, then they will feel fine with what we have processed. But in the spirit of working cooperatively, we could certainly take another look at Exhibit F, and I think that's the direction Council's given us. But they also have expressed some reluctance if we're to prolong this effort for some period of time into the future, an unknown factor. We'd do so with some reluctance. So I think that's pretty much where we were.
Thank you. Anybody else from Fellsmere would like to comment or? Mayor?
Thank you. In meeting with council at our last meeting, we had a discussion about the ISBA, and at that time, we expressed that we did not have a problem with the point-to-point contiguity that Sebastian had requested. I don't think see that as an issue. We were a bit concerned with dragging this process out further and further. We were under the impression that based on the last staff meeting, that staff had come to a certain level of comfort and wanted all the elected officials to get back together and weigh in and then move forward. And it was my understanding that at the staff level, the last meeting, they had intended to be their last meeting. So I think if we have issues, we need to go ahead and hash them out tonight, and give staff a direction to where to go so we're not in this indefinite negotiation period. It's been going on for over a year now, I believe, and some of these issues we just need to work out. And if it takes us working them out, if we need to appoint a member of each council to go to the staff meetings, similar to the school concurrency issue, then that's something we need to go ahead and do so that the direction is given back to staff and to councils and the commission to go ahead and move forward on this issue.
Thank you. Okay, Indian River Shores.
Mayor, if you don't mind,
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure.
We're just in sync with the other municipalities on the 4 issues that we feel are outstanding. In Section 6, the point-to-point annexation issue, Exhibit F with the Fellsmere Development Guidelines, and also with City of Vero Beach on Exhibit D concerning the Citrus Highway issue. And the last, which is number 4 for us, would be the new town locations as far as the proximity between the two. And again, we're going to wait and reserve our comments until after we hear what the county's perspective is going to be on these issues.
Okay, thank you. Orchid.
My only concern still is the language of the poison pill. If we're looking forward to 20 years, we don't know how the county commission is going to be, who's going to be on it, if you're going to get 5 proponents of a charter. And under this poison pill, the adoption of a resolution by the board or adoption of an ordinance by the board would allow other towns and municipalities to opt out of this. And it just concerns me. I don't know if it can be rewritten or if the county would even allow it to be rewritten. But that's one of my reservations.
First off, I want to compliment everybody who's on, I believe that's the north side of the room, because they've worked hard it's been a year and a half on this, and I think a lot of progress has been made. The only things I would like to echo is, Councilmember Coy, I agree with your comment. You can't have a new town put right on top of an old town. There needs to be some distance. After attending a number of MPO meetings and listening to comments on the Citrus Highway, I agree it ought to be taken out. I think that was very clear in the MPO meeting last week. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen in St. Lucie County. It shouldn't even be in this document, unless I misread what happened in last week's MPO meeting. Other than that, as far as the town of Orchid goes, we have no problems.
Thank you. County?
Good evening. I'm Bob Keating, County Community Development Director. Both of the items that the county had identified as issues have already been discussed to some degree tonight. One of them is the point-to-point contiguity, and as I understand it tonight, it seems that the City of Sebastian has actually withdrawn the point-to-point contiguity issue. We really had concerns about that, not so much that they could annex the Graves property, but that it could result in some really poor jurisdictional types of situations where it's difficult to provide services. So based on that, I think county staff is generally in agreement with what Sebastian is proposing regarding doing away with the point-to-point and identifying the Graves property as a property that can be annexed subject to the allowances of 171 Part 2. We do have a few concerns because the way it seems, and if you all saw the map that was passed around, this would create some enclaves. It would create some 40-acre tracts that would be in the county and completely surrounded by the City of Sebastian. So the county has a concern about that, and the county just has a concern about how the actual annexations of this area would work. I think these can be solved with some wording changes, but I think the good thing is, speaking on the county's behalf from a staff perspective, we don't have a problem generally with what Sebastian wants to do. The other issue that the county had identified related to Section 10F of the proposed agreement and Exhibit F. And those issues really relate to what the City of Vero Beach brought up. They both relate to Exhibit F, which are the criteria for development of the Fellsmere parcels that were annexed after May 22nd, but prior to the date of this agreement. And the land use criteria that would apply to them. This whole issue was a topic of discussion for almost every meeting we had as a staff group, whether or not the already annexed properties in Fellsmere would have any criteria that would relate to them. Right now, the way 10F is written, the criteria in Exhibit F would not apply to the current amendments that are right now under review by the Department of Community Affairs and that the Department of Community Affairs has substantial objections to. The other thing that county staff has a problem with is Exhibit F itself doesn't have good criteria to ensure that the development that will occur in that area will be the type of development that doesn't create urban sprawl. So basically, what county staff would like to see, and the Board of County Commissioners concurred with this at a recent meeting, is county staff would like to see Section 10F beefed up so that Exhibit F criteria would apply to all amendments that Fellsmere does for the annexed property, and that the criteria in Exhibit F should be strengthened, and strengthened along the lines of the comments and objections that the Department of Community Affairs has. And that's county staff's perspective.
Commissioners?
I would concur with Bob's comments on the map that was passed around. To me, it looks like a real checkerboard of jurisdictional limits, and I don't think that was what our intent was to try to have something contiguous without gerrymandering all around. You can almost drive and go through one 40-acre tract will be in the county, the next will be in the city, then the county and the city again. And that can just be a real problem for emergency services and delivery of other utility services. So I think we still need a lot of work on the either the point-to-point or the contiguity or the Sebastian WC area. I think we still need a lot of work there. Several cities had the concern about the location of new towns. I think originally we had talked about, what was it, Bob, a mile buffer or something that we thought was reasonable? And
we talked about both a mile and a half mile. And I neglected to say this, but at the last meeting of the staff working group, the group voted not to require a separation distance, and I think it was a vote, kind of a quid pro quo, that Sebastian was getting the allowance to annex the Graves property. Therefore, the Graves property, if it wants to develop in the county, shouldn't have constraints regarding a separation distance for a new town from an existing city limit line.
Okay, but just.
We can see how it was interpreted as a quid pro quo, because that's how the vote went down. But if you look at how we voted on that Sebastian voted for the point-to-point and against the new towns. So I understand how Bob said that. I understand that conclusion. That's how it looks. Okay. But there was no quid pro quo on that issue.
Right. Okay. And I personally, as one of five, don't have a real issue if we want to have a half mile or 1 mile separation. I'm fine with that. So we can talk that out. On the 10F section, I've had concerns because the city of Fellsmere has moved ahead with their comp plan amendment applications. And the reasoning was, well, this has taken a long time and we wanted to move forward. And I remember speaking at the Fellsmere public hearing when they delayed the Fellsmere joint venture annexation for 30 days under the pretense they wanted to give the interlocal time to work. And I testified there that 30 days was ridiculous. It was going to take a much longer time. That's why we had the 1-year stand-down agreements. And we all went into this knowing it was very complex. It was going to take a lot of time. And so to use the reasoning that, well, it's been a long time, so we're moving forward with our comp plan amendments, when my thought was the original intent was Exhibit F was going to deal with those properties. I would like to see us still keep Exhibit F in there and to give it some meat and to have the Fellsmere not proceed with their comp plan amendments until this negotiating group, which is what we're all here for, has a chance to iron Exhibit F out and make it part of the agreement. Thank you.
Yes, Commissioner Fleischer?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mayor, thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity, and I want to, again, thank the staff for setting this up. Mr. Minner started off with a brief overview, and it was very accurate. I'd like you to bring back the first map, if you could. Is there a possibility to bring back that first map? Just as a reminder, I'll continue talking, but I'd just like to look at the first map, and then the second map, and then the third map, because you did caution we might be seeing it again, and I think we all should. From the beginning of this interlocal agreement meeting, however, it was morphed out. There was some limited energy in the beginning, and it was slow to go, and it suddenly took off. And I think the maps point out how much it truly took off and what the level of commitment. I was present during the first few meetings, and I watched the first map change, and the voices in the room were clear that there was very little to concede. And look at that map. That's rather overwhelming. Now if you go to the second map, that was just after 2 months of discussion. And then there was some concerns about how we were going to re-engineer the efforts of services in this county. And now, Al, if you want to go to the third map, look at what you've all done. I think that speaks bounds of what has happened in the room and the level of commitment. Yes, there is one portion, one color of the map that really didn't decrease that much in value, but I think that the energy that the staff has put into this is absolutely incredible and speaks bounds for all of the municipalities and the county. There was some earlier concern discussed about services, and I have to agree with Councilor Vitunik that when we get to the USAC, that's where services, it was my understanding where services would be ironed out, and that would be at the USAC. I want to bring up the USAC as I was discussing with the mayor, newly elected Mayor Sebastian. We were briefly discussing the interlocal agreement and the importance just a while back, and a discussion came up about the unanimous decision, and I think we ironed it out, and then I had to throw some thought to it for a minute. When we say unanimous decision, we were looking to, I believe the initial intent was to eliminate special interest and to eliminate one municipality to be able to govern, take over, influence another municipality or within the county as well. And I think there might be room for error and judgment, and I just wanted to point it out. When I look at the concept about unanimous decision is we can look at 3 votes from each elective office and come up with a consensus, and I believe that would be a majority. But in essence, if one municipality has issue with another municipality, we might see some unusual activity and perhaps the arena or the possibility for a veto. And that does bring me some concern, and I think that we should at least consider, maybe go back to one of the meetings and consider what was discussed earlier about a majority voting, and that would probably alleviate some of the concern. I know that I've spoke to some of the people in the room, and they've also expressed that as well, and I believe that the very intent was to step away from special interest, and I believe there was another form of government that was discussed that we were attempting to look at as an alternative. I believe that we might be putting ourselves in that same position if we look at a majority from each elective office, then to come up with a majority. I believe that perhaps we might want to at least consider an overall majority, a clear majority. And Al Minner, finally, in the beginning of the meeting, you said that after today's meeting, we'll be able to go back to our respective bodies of government and make that decision. I don't believe we should be in that rush. I believe that this is the time to iron it out, and if there's something else to iron out and go back to additional meetings, I think we have to give everything we can to make sure it happens. I'm not concerned that we've been here a year. Look at those 3 maps and what has been accomplished in this document. It's rather robust, but it needs a little bit more work. And I think that in all fairness to all the citizens of this county and all the municipalities, we need to give just time to what needs to be done for the future of the county. And finally, I understand there's legislation on and about the DCA. And if that's the case, this may be the most important document that has been provided in this state. I think we're blazing a trail, and I think that we need to do it right. So we need a little bit more time. Ample time should be given, and I don't think we should be rushing back to our councils or the commission to make sure that it's done, because in haste, we may be making a very rash decision, and I think a little bit more ironing out needs to be done. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner.
Now, the only thing that I would probably disagree with Commissioner Fleischer on is that I think, all the work that's gone into this, all the municipalities and the county working together, I believe that changes in the future, if this is adopted, should be unanimous among. That's what the document's all about, is to make a firm commitment to each other.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, where do we go from here? Yes, Bob.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I have I hope will be viewed as a technical issue, and that is toward the end of the agreement on page 13, you have a section 13 entitled Right of Enforcement. The first sentence really deals with enforcement. The second sentence is a savings clause, and I think it may be a little too narrow. And I would urge the group to consider an amendment to the savings clause. Earlier this year, the city of Sebastian and the city of Fellsmere resolved their litigation through a stipulation and a stipulated final judgment in their lawsuit. I don't think that should be lost in the approval of this document by all the cities, including Fellsmere and Sebastian. And I would recommend that the last sentence of Section 13 should read, "Nothing herein should be construed as a waiver to any other right granted by law or court order." And I say that because I think it was unintentionally narrowed when it says granted by law, and I think it should include the court order should also be saved. So that is my recommendation to the group here.
Thank you. Well, I think we've all seen that we've come a long way from the initial start of this process, and I think staff has done a wonderful job of getting us to this point. I know our city manager, Mr. Minner, has said that now it's time for the councils and the commissioners get our heads together and iron out these last few details, and I think probably this is the time to do it. So there are a few sticking points, but I believe that we all want the same thing. We all want to preserve the quality of life that we enjoy here in Indian River County. I think we can all agree to that. And each city has its own vision of what they envision their city to be 10 or 15 years down the road. And I know that Sebastian is not like Vero, and Fellsmere is not like Sebastian to a certain extent, and Vero is Vero, and the shores are the shores, and Orchid is Orchid. And so we each have different visions, but that shouldn't preclude us being able to work together and come to an agreement. And I agree with Commissioner Wheeler, it should be unanimous. We should go forward together. We should forge this document and then be able to stick to it. And there should be enough latitude in there so that we can each incorporate our vision of what our town will be, especially because the reserve area has been shrunken down to a point where we're not taking over the whole county. The county's still going to be the county. And there's a lot of latitude in there for new town development in the county that could make the landscape look dramatically different than what it does now. So I have some concerns about new towns, but that's the county situation. And change is going to happen. The only thing constant in this world is change. Change is going to happen. So whether we do this or whether we don't do this, 20 years from now, the landscape's going to look different. The difference is, did we manage it well or didn't we manage it very well? Because I know that Dade County, Broward County, they didn't have this kind of a document in front of them 20 years ago or 30 years ago. Would that they did. That landscape may look different today. That's all I have.
If I could, from listening to everyone tonight, it seems as though we have so much more in common on this document than we are apart, and it seems that we're pretty darn close to getting this thing done. I don't hear a lot of great objections to some of the concerns that have been stated, and I would love to see us work these things out. You know the objections that the City of Sebastian has, and I would love to hear potential objections to those from other municipalities. It didn't seem as though there were any, and it seems as though the City of Fellsmere is willing to work with the rest of us on these issues that we have. And from my standpoint as an elected official, it seems like we're close. So I don't see this thing necessarily needing to take a great deal more time. I'd love to see this document ironed out, and I look forward to doing that. And I again, if someone can tell me where we're a long ways apart on this thing, I'd love to hear it. If there's something we can't work out, let's get it on the table and work it out.
I was going to say, I just think that since it seems to me that the one that everybody is interested in is at Exhibit F, that's the hardest. Why don't we go ahead and start with the hardest and then move on? So I think Exhibit F is the one that we need to address. If there's any changes that specifically we need to look at, that's what I suggest we do.
Mayor Dunlap.
I think we should take the...
I don't need that. I come up with three different things that I've listened to tonight. Okay.
You do need it.
Sorry. I've come up with three different things I've listened to tonight, maybe four, and I think unanimous might be the fourth one. If I can, may I just take the real easy one first? Can we all throw out the Citrus Highway? Get it out of the contract? Is there anybody who objects to doing that?
We need a motion on it.
Well, they'll probably have to come back with, I mean, you know, I'm just trying to work through them to get to resolution on these. I don't see anybody objecting to getting up. While he's looking it up, I'll give you my next one, just to save time. And this is yours, Councilmember Coy. The 5 miles versus a mile or a mile and a half for a new town. Why can't we come up with a resolution here what is satisfactory for the county and satisfactory for each of the towns? I make life simple. I've got a mile and a half, I've got 5 miles, I add them together, I get 6.5 miles, I divide by 2, why don't we make it 3 miles? I'm just throwing that out to get you going. But I think we need to come up with answers for the staff so we can all move ahead.
I agree.
You all, sure.
Bob,
Can you live with that?
Yeah, I'd like to.
Wes?
I want to hear from Bob. Bob, actually, what is the compelling reason? Why do we want that totally out of there from the county staff perspective?
I think that generally new towns are a good way to develop if development is going to occur outside the urban service area. It has the ability to protect a lot of agriculture and open spaces and concentrate the actual develop part of an area. I want to point out a couple of things. In Sebastian's Exhibit D, they actually have an allowance for using the county's new town in Exhibit D. And also in the agreement, Fellsmere has the ability to use a new town to develop in its reserve area. I think from county staff's perspective, if there's a need for a separation distance, the separation distance is probably from the town itself, the developed part, not the conserved part or the open space part. But I don't think the separation really should be more than a half mile. And that way we're not really constraining some of the large landowners out there who may be in proximity to city limits.
You want to go back to an easy one?
Bob, if you could, just to help me with this, the new town requirement for the county with the number of acres, and I've seen some of the language in here, the 1,200 acres?
East of 95, it's 1,200 acres. West of 95, 4,000 acres.
And I think right now, the hardest one, obviously, that is given the municipalities' issues at this point, I'd say would be the ones east of 95, in the event that there were some of those to come forward.
Yes.
And what you're saying is, obviously, in the event that one of those were to come forward, we would want to put those nearer where the current services are. And, of course, that's obviously going to be closer to current municipalities' boundaries or, in fact, closer to our urban service boundary, so that we could cluster those and then leave the backside of that open to accomplish what we want to get accomplished in the new town. And you're saying if we have that requirement of 3.5 miles in there, we're not locating any of the future growth that may come forward with a new town close to the urban services as they currently exist, or in the future where they may exist near municipal boundaries.
Actually, I don't know if you could put a new town east of 95 with a 3-mile separation distance. And you may not be able to put one north of 60 west of 95.
With that rationale, though, about keeping it close to current urban service boundaries, though financially that makes great sense, it creates the problem of piling a town on top of another town. And that's what happens when you drive south to north in Florida. You go from one town to the next town. You blink and you're in the next one. You blink and you're in the next one. I think a lot of us have the vision that we'd like that separation, and we'd like to have a transition from one place to another. I don't want to have Fellsmere sign back to back with ours, though it's probably going to be. It would be nice if we can transition it so that you know you're leaving Sebastian. It would be nice to have county space in between there. But if we're going to allow for the conditions that we can new town it, that's exactly what we're going to put ourselves into. Line after line after line, one after the other.
Are you comfortable with a half mile, Andrea?
Not at all.
What's your comfort level?
I like the suggestion from Mayor Dunlap.
Well, I think he just did an addition.
That's a great compromise.
Right,
and we forgot, I mean, Mr. Keating said mile and half a mile, 5 miles. I'm sorry, I was in on this from day one. It was initially 5 miles. And somehow that disappeared. That discussion occurred here. And it got smaller and smaller and smaller. So I think that's a great compromise, 3 miles. And then you have a transition.
On this one, I'd suggest that we're probably not going to answer it tonight. I think we need to go back and do it, basically take the map, have the county staff draw concentric circles to show what a half mile, a mile, 3 miles, and 5 miles would do from a practical point of view. And I think seeing that visually on a map might help us make a quicker decision down the line and a better decision down the line.
So I think we all agree we're going to go with Commissioner Soleri's recommendation that we have a map come back to all of us that shows in circles half mile, mile, 3 miles, 5 miles, so we can make an intelligent decision to move on.
Yeah, I think that Mayor Coy made a point that we can all visualize and see. Bob, I understand what you're trying to say, but I think that really what you need to do is is to make the point of exactly, what that does to the future growth patterns of the county, and how it is either impractical or not.
Yes, we can do that.
And then bring that forward, because I think that, on first blush, everybody agrees, emotionally with what Mayor, or Ms., I'm sorry,
What's her name?
Councilwoman. I'm still calling you Mayor Coy. I apologize about that, Mayor Gilmore.
But Andrea's.
Yeah, there you go. But I think that that would certainly help for everybody to see the visual aid of it, and then, of course, try to explain how what the county's goal is in this area, where we don't want it to be annexed, and we want to keep that open space in the agriculture areas, just like everybody else is in their annexation area.
That's what makes us different. That's what makes us different right now from anywhere south of here. We do have that space in between our municipalities. That's why we're so special. We already have that. We need to keep that. Otherwise, we're going to be the same old stuff.
Before I go on to the more controversial one, Hal, did you have a problem with the Citrus Highway? You were looking at something else. It doesn't mean you stop 82nd Avenue or 90th, but it's not the Citrus Highway going all the way to Martin County.
No, and in our review of that, the Citrus Highway was we used that as kind of the local name to define the WEC, and as long as everybody's okay to just defining it differently, or referring back to the map, or giving us the flexibility to have different land uses within those reserve areas, we're okay.
Are you okay with that, Charlie? Okay. Now let's move on to Exhibit F. And I want to put two people on the spot here, Jason and Bob. Could you guys live with Exhibit F being whatever the DCA comes down with?
I think we would certainly go in that direction. I think the specificity that it lacks was kind of our anticipation of what would ultimately be required, and we could refine it in that direction.
How about you, Bob?
Yes, if what DCA comes down with can be incorporated within an Exhibit F document, that would be fine. Yes.
Mayor Adams, how about you?
I think that would be workable, definitely.
Does anybody else in Fellsmere want to scream? Then I know Gary's going to say something.
Well, no, what I heard is a commitment from Bob and half a commitment from Mr. Nonamaker. I just wonder if there's two commitments there, or just 1.5 commitments.
That's why I went down to Mayor Adams. So, I mean, we're all going to boycott Marsh Landing if you don't give us a commitment, Susan. So,
That's dangerous.
I think it's time for the Fellsmere Council to say, could you live with whatever DCA comes down with?
Oh, I think that's definitely workable. Yes.
Okay. I just don't know how to take the word workable. That's why I'm...
It's like Bob said, it depending on how we could work that into an exhibit language, and how Jason and Rochelle felt as far as that working into an exhibit type of structure. I don't think the council would have a problem with that.
I don't think Bob said, on how you work it. I think if I heard Bob right, he said, yes, we could work that in, and we would work it in. In other words, it was a firm commitment to go with DCA. Is that correct, Bob?
Yes, DCA is going to approve amendments that are specific, saying this, this, and this. What you really need to do is take the criteria out of those amendments and incorporate them with an Exhibit F. It's not simply going with what DCA says, because they'll be approving a whole thick document. It's more gleaning what the principles are and what the criteria are from what DCA approves. But yes, we're completely happy with doing that.
I think where we're going with that is we could take the pieces out of what comes back from DCA and turn that into an exhibit. Is that what everybody's looking for?
I think that's correct, but so we can move forward.
Right.
We can state that Exhibit F will be controlled by the DCA requirements that come down, and so that we're not putting this whole thing on hold for forever.
Mm-hmm.
I realize what the commissioners have said about let's not rush into something. I'm not rushing in, but I'm trying to move it forward so that we're all going forward together.
And we're on the same page as far as that's concerned.
All right.
And
There's just some balance. We need to make sure that we get a final resolution that is here right now, but not down to the nth detail. That's not going to allow us any flexibility into the future. Because there will be changes that we want to make in 15 years, and that cannot be subject to unanimous approval of this board.
There may be changes the state of Florida is going to want to make too, and so we
DCA
got
might not exist.
to have flexibility there.
I mean, that agency's under sunset review right now, but, I think there's certainly things that we can do that will be much closer to what DCA is looking at, but we've got to make sure we afford council the flexibility in the future. And with that in mind, we could certainly do that.
This is also contingent upon what our attorney brought up, too. We have to change the language in Section 13 because of a situation that is currently ongoing with Sebastian and Fellsmere. The language in Section 13 to add "or by court order," we need to get consensus on that because that affects an ongoing issue.
And just
I don't think
anybody had a problem with that.
Yeah, and I don't think we can create a document that goes against, obviously, law, but the court order, I mean, we're bound to uphold that. So, I mean, if it makes you feel better, I'm good with that, but I don't think that was
Just
ever the
dotting
intent.
the I and crossing the T.
Well, and just for the record, we're in full compliance with that stipulated settlement. We've met our part of the bargain. We've transmitted the ag amendment, so that shouldn't be an issue for us.
I just assumed, Councilmember McCoy, that everybody would agree to that language. If they don't, they ought to speak up now. The final thing, which Commissioner Wheeler brought up, was unanimous versus non-unanimous, and I think that's the final, unless I've missed something, that's the final item we need to resolve. Charlie.
We have the issue of D, E, and F coming before USAC.
At least a review.
In advisory capacity.
Well, I assumed they were going to come forward.
Those
Is
were
that still an
accepted.
issue? That's an issue with Vero Beach, you're saying?
It is. Although we didn't take a formal vote on it, we talked to the mayor, and it was discussed by some citizens groups that all projects coming in under the exceptions should at least get a review by USAC. And what I'd like to suggest is that our working group meet again maybe right after the holidays and put all your comments into this document, and maybe that working group can discuss that issue. And at that meeting, we'll have the concentric circles on the half-mile issue and bring that back to you.
Yeah, I just think we have a responsibility to stay here tonight till we resolve the issues so that you people can put together a final document. Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, as Vice Mayor Joyce said, also, I think Section 15, B, 1, 2, and 3, that needs to be resolved. The poison pill. I'll wait if you're ready to go into it. Yeah, what I was saying is I think Section 15, B, 1, 2, and 3 need to be resolved, the dub poison pill.
A, B, and C?
But I can wait until we get to that.
Are you all right on that? I mean, before we go to and I think Gary's issue's pretty close to the last issue. Are you all right on that review process? What do you need from us, Charlie?
I think what our concerns were in D and F, that we still have some rather broad general principles. We're still arguing about some of them, but when you get specific projects that come in, for instance, I believe in the county, when you do a new town, you do use floating zone to come in there. The USAC wouldn't, right now we're just looking at comp plan amendments. Probably the important thing is the new town and the planned development that's going in, and that's impact rather than some general principle that we're looking at a very large area. I think that would have more impact. It'd be easier to deal with it at that time, even though we can get some further agreement on specifics. So when you get down to those actual projects of that size, and I don't mean every project, but we basically, the way this agreement reads now, for instance, the city of Vero Beach, any annexation we do almost automatically will take USAC review. It doesn't need a vote, but it'll have to go to USAC because our densities are higher than the county, almost every land use classification. So we don't see that as an onerous thing, as long as I think we can come up with some specifics. We don't want to make this a tedious thing, but I think you talk about a new town, it's one thing to talk about general principles, another thing to see what specifically that new town is and what impacts it'll have, and I think would have countywide consequences, and I think we should look at it, and that was our suggestion to do it that way. The unfortunate thing is we're coming at this late date with this, so we hesitate to be, I think we've talked about it among ourselves, but I think this may be one way to get around some of the concerns we've heard from other groups dealing with some of these, what they call the general principles. And
we're just suggesting review. We're not saying the USAC unanimous decision. We're suggesting review.
I think USAC is great for review because I think then we're all working together in this county, all the 5 municipalities and the county commission. So I don't have a problem with it. I can't speak for the other people in the town of Orcutt or obviously for anybody else in the room.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, I think we still need to resolve the issue of Sebastian's point-to-point and their little checkerboard there.
I just skipped because Bob said he was happy, so.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. And the other thing is, while we're on new towns, Bob, we're allowing 2 units an acre on the gross density. And is there any way we can make 1 unit per acre be required to come from TDRs? And I think it's important because if we're going to limit it to only 2 west of I-95, that the only way some other landowners may get value is if they can sell their development rights. If we're only going to have 2 new towns, so if we could just say, it's maximum of 2 units per acre, but 50% of those units have to come from TDRs or something.
Right now, Exhibit E is just a maximum. You're going to be going back this year as part of the ear-based amendments and actually making changes to the comp plan, including changes to the new towns. Right now, the county's new town allowance does not allow 2 units per acre. So at that time, you could modify the new town regulations as long as they're under the maximum that are here. So what I'm saying is down the road, yes, you can accomplish that. This is just a maximum, a not to exceed amount right now.
Okay.
And I think that along those lines, I think that we have other municipalities looking at units and our new town requirements.
That's why I wanted to bring it up tonight. So just so, I guess, so you all know that's where I would like to see it come from, and as you go forward with this. On the Sebastian parcel, my understanding is this area is part of their extended planning area, which Exhibit D says it will be developed as Western Employment Centers. Is that correct? Okay. Under Exhibit D, item 1, and then 2, the size, says WEC shall have a minimum land area of 500 acres. Now, I'm not sure the way they have that map, those little 40-acre checkerboards, how are they going to make the 500 acres to satisfy the WEC requirement and have a viable plan? Okay, Exhibit D.
Yep.
The capital, Roman numeral 1, Western Employment Center. Under that you have subsection 1, which is location. And then there's subsection 2, size.
Yep.
And it says there'll be a minimum land area of 500 acres. And I'm just curious how you can achieve that with the map you showed us earlier.
Actually, the reason is almost all of those 40-acre tracts are under the same ownership.
You know,
Right, but some of them are scattered, so how are you going to pull together a contiguous employment center with a center and the whole design here when you're that scattered?
Because there's stronger restriction levels, number one, that require that as you go in development, you get your X of residential, but then you can't get any more residential until you move forward into other areas. Now, that has some contention with some of the developer, but it is a restriction, but it's a restriction that we think is one that the community wants to see. And when I say the community, I mean the county. Secondly, I think when you go in there and you look at the minimum of the 500 acres, the bigger we get in there as far as the 500 acres, the less of the jagged edges and the enclave issues, the issues that Bob has, the more we annex there, the less of a problem that is. And that's why we brought up that other map, because as we showed you, as you fill in those gaps, we think that there are going to be less service issues. We think that there are going to be less annexation issues. And then finally, we throw in there where we think this works is that, look, the part of the issue, if you go back and with all due respect to Fellsmere, and you look at some of the issues they had there that we've all talked about today with annexation off a point-to-point or non-contiguity issue, the county didn't have that issue 5 years ago, and Fellsmere did that annexing. Now, we're here, we've restricted where we can go with our reserve areas, and now we're just looking to be able to do what we think is the better development under restricted guidelines. So we're asking that if the developer wants to go one way or the other, meaning does he want to develop with the county or does he want to develop with the city, that the city has the opportunity to be able to develop that way. So in all those respects, we think you lose the contiguity issue and the service issues because it's already restricted. B, we've got in there real tight restriction language on what is developed. And C, it gives actually the county and the city the ability to develop that at the developer's choosing.
Al, I'll just debate with you the fact that I believe a mistake was made not to challenge Fellsmere's point-to-point annexations. And having said that, just because I believe a mistake was made there, I don't think we should continue and make more mistakes going forward.
Okay.
And I see, if I understand the map you showed, the blue and the orange is what you want to annex. Is that correct?
No, potentially down the road. Yeah, potentially down the road, the city wants to be able to annex in its reserve area. And I respect that. You know, a mistake, from your opinion, was made, and you don't want to repeat that. Well, what we've done to not repeat that is we limited our reserve areas. Under this plan, if we did get into a jagged area or a jagged area that's off a point-to-point, you've limited where that's going to grow. So if you go back to this map, you know what map I'm going to show you. You go back to this map, you know what the extent of Sebastian is going to be. So the argument that you're going to have service issues or pockets or enclaves within our reserve area, I think is muted by the point that the city's promised its limits of what our annexation is. So we gave up that right.
Right, but again, tell me again, what do the blue squares and the red squares indicate?
Okay, just different owners.
Oh, just, okay.
Yeah, that's it, just different owners.
Right, so the whole green is what you all are looking at.
Right. Well, all the colors, and
right.
And this is
yellow they already got.
Right, and this is the area.
If they're good, then I mean that would make
right.
sense.
That one.
Right.
So anything in color right here, this is their reserve area. Is what they're saying.
Yeah, all of this is already in our reserve area. And so the point of how this got to the point-to-point, I think, is probably our inability at the work group level to figure out how to make this work for us, because we're planning who's going to develop first, probably Graves. Where are they going to do it? Probably, you'd think, around the 510 corridor. And so we would need to get in there. Now, those issues may fix itself. Say we annex the yellow areas for whatever reason before we got into the green areas. Then I don't think we'd have any point-to-point issues. But if that doesn't happen, the green is going to happen first. So that's where the city was looking for some of our flexibility, and it's already within our restricted reserve area.
Okay, well, let me just ask you this then. Say you get the yellow, like you said, the Sebastian River Park property.
Right.
Okay, are you going to then jump over some of that green and grab the Barnes Groves and the blue, or are you going to be contiguous as you go downward?
If, in my opinion, and I think in the city's opinion, if the yellow parts come in before the green parts did, I don't think we have a point-to-point issue.
No, he's asking.
I'm asking if you get the yellow.
Uh-huh.
And then your next annexation is you jump over the green down to the blue square that says Barnes Groves. So would you jump from the yellow to the blue?
No, because in that case, we're going to have the 500-acre issue. Because you're going to have the 500-acre lots.
And there's nothing contiguous there. I don't think the DCA would even allow that.
Yeah, I couldn't jump down here. I'd still have to be contiguous. And so we're agreeing that we still want to be contiguous, but we're saying we want to be contiguous along a point. So I can't develop up here and then go jump down here unless all of that would come in.
Okay, all right. That was my concern. I thought you all might jump over some of the green to get to the blue, or jump the blue to get to the red or something.
No.
Okay.
The issue here, though, is that yellow is already platted lots subdivision. That the county has already.
Right.
I believe, is Sebastian River Park LLC, is that platted? I believe it is, isn't it?
Actually, neither one are final platted. Blue Water Bay has the infrastructure mostly in, but they haven't gotten final plat. They have PD approval. Sebastian Park has plan development approval, but they have not proceeded any further.
So there still is opportunity before individual residents get in there for the city of Sebastian to perhaps. We don't know. It would be based on whether or not the property owner wanted to do something there.
Right.
But in the event that they didn't, looking at it long term, yes, that'd be enclaves right there that we obviously would not want a municipality to have, or for the county to have in that area. But if they didn't, then what? And that's where the point-to-point came forward.
Yeah, and I'm fine with that entire parcel as long as they do it in contiguous steps.
So I think we have agreement there.
You don't have a problem with point-to-point as long as it's contiguous?
I don't have a problem with point-to-point specifically to this parcel they've identified. I do have a concern with just general point-to-point wording in the document.
But that's why they did this. Right. This took away the point-to-point. Right. And then they said, instead of us calling it point-to-point or anything, we're just going to show you a picture. Right. And that's the 1,000 words.
I'm fine with that entire green parcel as long as it moves in contiguous steps.
Commissioner O'Brien, if I may, staff agrees with a lot of your concerns, though. We want to make sure that there's not a blanket exemption from 171 Part 1. Enclaves, and you even mentioned contiguity. Theoretically, they could exempt themselves from any type of contiguity, so they could start south and work their way north and not even be attached to the existing city limits. I don't know if that's their intent. I don't think it is, but that's why the language that comes out is very important, that it's narrowly tailored not to permit enclaves and to still have some type of contiguity, so it's just not, picking within different locations inside their reserve area.
Okay. Can we add, we're all cool on that one, Commissioner? We're fine? All right. Let's go on to page 14 of the document. And I think this addresses what Commissioner Wheeler is talking about. Let me take the third one first, and I want to ask one of the lawyers, and I think it's Charlie, I want to ask this. Charlie, on number 3, shouldn't that be the passage of a bill by either House or Senate? You have either House. Oh, you mean either of the two legislative bodies? Is that how you mean it? I want to make sure I understand how your word is there on number 3.
Either House of the State of Florida legislature.
Which means Senator.
I think we mean the passage by either the House or the Senate.
I just want to make sure that's clear.
Right.
Obviously, none of us can countermand what the state does. So if the state goes ahead and puts through charter would replace this document. On item 1, the Florida statute states that if a citizens group comes forward with a certain percentage of citizens to investigate and create a charter commission, that has to be allowed. We can't fight the state of Florida on that. We shouldn't be even trying to. So I don't think that this, while that study is going on, it doesn't mean you should abandon ISBA. While the study is going on, if there is to be a study, we ought to still live under this document. This document would only die if that study happened, it came to a vote of all the citizens of the county, and they were to vote. And if they voted in charter, then this document would die. We shouldn't be able to walk away from this document just because a commission is looking at it. It doesn't mean it's going to succeed.
The proponent of that language is really Fellsmere, and I think they should talk to it.
Well, first off, we wouldn't be bound to abandon the agreement. We could opt out of it, but I would offer as a substitute to the extent that any proposed charter offers peremptory language. If the county wants to change its form of governance, if the county wants to do anything within its purview, that's fine. But to the extent they usurp the home rule authority of municipalities, we should have every right to take leave of this agreement and do what we think is in our best interest.
But Jason, I think we can all agree that if the state mandates it, we have no choice. Would you agree with that?
Yes, sir.
All right. If a group of people that aren't even related to this room, 15% of the people, the population of the county, want to study charter, that doesn't mean we should walk away from ISBA. We ought to live under it in good faith until they come back with a report, and if the report gets it placed on a ballot, then you wait till you've had the election on it, because it may win, it may be defeated. I mean, you're causing charter to be pushed through if you walk away from this document while a commission is, a charter commission is studying charter, or until it comes up for a vote.
No, I think
Mayor Dunlap?
Yes, sir.
I'd just like to say, I think pretty much agree with what Jason just said. There's a lot of other reasons a charter could be created. And I think what Jason said is only if the proposed charter tries to countermand or usurp or the provisions of the interlocal agreement, then they can walk. But if the citizens in 10 years from now say they want to make the tax collector position a nonpartisan office, we should not walk away from this agreement. And just because a charter goes in does not mean this agreement goes away. As a matter of fact, in the wording we had of the proposed charter, it specifically said the county will still honor any existing interlocal agreements. So there's a lot of reasons you can go forward, but I think what Jason was saying is only if it tries to take away the power or the agreements within this interlocal agreement, then you should have the right to walk away. But, so I think that should be the focus, is if the charter tries to take away the agreements in this interlocal, sure, walk away, but not just because a charter government is formed.
That's right. Well, I was getting there. I'm trying to get to the point where it's only if charter tries to take over what ISBA is.
Just probably get together and write one section that says that and do away with all the rest of this.
Yeah, I can't, when I read this document, it, first section 1, where it says, a resolution by the commission or following submission of a petition to the county commission signed by at least 15% of the qualified electors of the county requiring the charter commission to be established in accordance with the procedures of 125.61 Florida statutes. Then you jump down to 3, which you mentioned, with the legislature. The legislature, nor 15% of the people in this county, neither of those are a party to this agreement. And I don't know how we can bind what they want to do with this agreement. The other thing is the paragraph right at the top, halfway across the first line. It says, you're trying to be more specific, I think Commissioner O'Brien is, but it says, while an attempt is made to establish a charter. So you're actually just, the minute anybody raises their head and says they want to do something, whether it be the legislature or a 15% of the public getting a petition signed, you can withdraw from the ISBA. Is that correct?
I think the verbiage here may be too broad. I think what we've maintained is our sole issue is preemption. To the extent a charter government doesn't preempt home rule authority, I don't think we really have a concern. There may be other concerns, that I'm sure council might have a preference over form of governance in the county at large, but that really is not part and parcel of this agreement.
Well, I could see tightening this up. I think this is too general and too broad, because just the three words it says, that while an attempt is being made. If a commission, if the citizenry want to do a charter, and also that 15% would be probably citizens from the entire county. I would assume that probably people from every municipality that have an interest in that, if it ever rises again, would be from the municipalities and the unincorporated area. But and it's going to take, under the citizens, I don't know how long it takes with the legislature, but under the citizens, it's going to take probably a minimum of 18 months. And then the day that they decide they're going to attempt to do this, you can withdraw and start annexing again. And I think that we should either eliminate this or tighten it up and be more specific as to what would be in the charter.
I think Richard's position is valid. That, if we take the time to put this together, and we are certainly taking a lot of time to do it, and the committee has done a great job. But if we're going to put this together, it should stick until such time as there is a charter. Not that somebody's thinking about a charter or that somebody's trying to get a committee together. This thing should be valid and hold the towns together.
I'm not a lawyer. I want you to know that right out. But I think we could change that sentence at the top of the page. And the lawyers, and you got a whole slew over there, they can fine tune it, and I have two sitting next to me. And I think if I'm listening to Jason and to the two commissioners correctly, if we were to say to continue this agreement while an attempt is made to establish a charter form of government which would have a negative impact, you guys put it in the right words, a negative impact on ISBA or negate ISBA would be inconsistent. So you could have a charter to do anything else, whether it would be to put the tax collector under charter, whether it would be to do any of those things, they can go ahead with that. Only if it conflicts with ISBA, then it's inconsistent. Can you all live with that? Does that satisfy Commissioner O'Brien and Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, Mayor, I can live with that. I'll be glad to work with Jason to come up with the exact wording on that will get to the committee.
The lawyers.
Yeah, well, I was trying to keep them out of it. I was trying to simplify it.
It's cheaper that way, too.
And I think we need to define negative. I think it clearly needs to define what would be a negative, or somehow it has to be ironclad. So
I'm just trying to give them direction so they can come back with a...
I think it'd be very clear if any of the actions of any form of charter would contradict or contradict with any element of the ISBA, I think that would be a strong triggering mechanism. I just wanted to point out that, ironically, even though this Section 15 appears late in the document, it was probably well written early on, and I think that some of the elements, as we looked at the map earlier, have changed, and I believe some of the mindsets have changed as well. And from tonight's discussion, we can see that there is open line of communication from everyone in the room. And I most certainly agree that I don't think that we should have such a harsh triggering mechanism. And Jason, thank you.
Thank you.
One of the just what you're talking about, adding that in, but I still think you could get 15% of the people to form a committee and put what I don't remember now, 15 people on the committee or 18, whatever it is, and you could come up with all kinds of things in dialogue before they would actually develop a charter and before it would actually go to the electorate. And I think that I would agree with Mr. Kenyon and Mr. Dunlap, and that this should not be preempted by people talking about or trying to build a charter. I think if it goes to the ballot and it passes, you don't know whether it's going to pass, you don't know what's going to be in it, and quite frankly, if you put a charter committee together from a cross section, you could have most anything in the charter. It may or may not be negative on this, but it would also, I think that it ought to, you don't know this is going to pass, so why kill this thing before it even got there? In fact, I don't think either of those are going to occur to begin with, but this is a document we got to live by once we sign it.
We're just judging it by history, and last time a charter was proposed for a specific purpose to take away home rule authority. We were told there would be a cross-section of people appointed to a charter commission that didn't materialize. So we're just basing off historical precedents on how we move forward with it, and we're protecting the municipal interests.
In fact, none of it materialized. So, if you were to cancel this whole thing out for something that's not going to materialize,
hey,
then,
if I can jump in for a second. If I can jump in for a second, maybe there seems to be some compromise in this, and that's the point of A, water down the poison pill, and B, what is going to be the charter. And maybe the compromise is A, okay, we take out the language so that it's actually when a charter is there. So then that's when you get to pull back. But instead of throwing some of the other things that are at least making me squirm a little bit is we don't make it specific to ISBA issues. So we water it down and say, or we take the watered down version out and say, no, when charters form, we do it, but it doesn't specifically say that it's for ISBA relating issues. So any charter, we get to go out, but only when charter comes up. Maybe there's some compromise.
only when it passes.
Right.
Okay. I
Only
would
when
agree
charter
with that.
passes, but any type of charter, not ISBA specific charter.
Well, I would disagree with that, Al. Again, what if the citizens want to make the tax collector a nonpartisan position? The only way to do that is through a charter. It's got nothing to do with planning, annexation, growth, densities. People just say, hey, it's an administrative job. We want to make it nonpartisan. And you want to throw all this away because of that?
Yeah. But once you have the charter today, and you have the next change tomorrow. And I think that's a valid concern of anybody. So,
right. But if it goes to take away
home rule,
the interlocal or the home rule.
I like the words home rule.
Yeah.
And everybody knows what home rule is, and you're not taking away your home rule if we make the tax collector nonpartisan.
Yeah.
So I think,
I really think Jason and I can sit down and get something here that'll be satisfactory along those lines.
And I think that would address Mr. Minner's concern about it, because it's clearly you're concerned about the autonomy of your community and your leaders to be able to.
Like, for example, there could be a push for a countywide police department.
Exactly.
And that's not land use, but that is home rule.
Right.
So.
Right.
But you can live with home rule, right? And I think all of us can live with the term home rule.
I think that's more palatable.
All right.
And that's really what Jason said at the beginning. Jason, are you good with the term home rule?
Absolutely. Okay. Commissioner Davis, I think the consensus is to protect against preemptive restriction for the municipality's home rule. The question then becomes, once you do have a proposed charter that does in fact do that, what stage in the process will give any party the ability to opt out or withdraw from the agreement? The way it's written now, this is essentially tracking Statute 125 and is what the committee felt was a substantial step toward the creation of a charter. There are later steps in the process, and it would take a thorough review of the statute to come up with a point in time that makes sense later on in furtherance of the adoption of the charter. But clearly, these are the first steps, substantial steps in the charter. In fact, Section 1, whether it come by a 15% vote of the electors, a petition signed by at least 15% of the electorate, or the adoption of a resolution by the commission, it culminates with the appointment of the commission, which is a time-consuming process. But there are later benchmarks in the charter process that perhaps we could explore that may give you some more comfort.
Mike, why couldn't we live with the vote, the day of the vote?
Well, from the county's perspective, we could. That was not...
because, I mean, that's black and white.
Yes, sir. That is fine with the county. It's just at the table, it wasn't coming together. So that's where we...
I would agree with Mayor Dunlap. I think the vote would determine, because you may get all upset about what's going on and all the dialogue going back and forth and reading the articles in the newspaper and reacting, and then it fails. And you've thrown all this work away for something that fails. And if it does pass, and if it's passed, then withdraw.
Gary, in an effort to tighten it up, one of the things we could do is say if the proposed charter, draft charter, doesn't have dual referendum in it, then we can opt out.
Yeah, in fact, the proposed charter that we were discussing before did have dual referendum in it. But I would agree with you, and I have no problem with that. I as a commissioner, would not want to do anything with the city that the city wasn't interested in doing.
Richard, I had a minor question, and regarding the term in that same section that I think that Sue brought up, and that is, it says the term is 20 years. It's a living document reviewed every 5. There's no provision for extension.
You can. My understanding from prior meetings, and I think Warren's going to address this, is we could extend it at any time. And each of the 5-year intervals, you could come up and move it, or you could wait till the end of the 20th year to extend it out.
That's correct.
Is that correct, Warren?
Mr. Dunlap's correct. You can review this on a 5-year basis and then extend it another 5 years, so you've always got 20 years out if that's what everybody wants to do.
Okay, I just wondered whether you needed the words there.
Well, do we just need to put that in there so it's clear that it'll be reviewed and potentially extended every 5 years or something, just so we're all clear with it?
Well, we better, because we all might not be here in 5 years.
Right.
So we ought to put it in there saying that it's going to have 5-year extension periods.
And that would be wording that that it would extend or could extend after every 5-year period.
With affirmative action.
Correct. Correct.
Yeah, okay.
I just have one more issue that we touched on earlier, but we didn't seem to wrap up, the issue of USAC review for Exhibits D, E, and F with Vero. Wouldn't that preclude the necessity for having an Exhibit D, E, and F? I mean, there are exceptions to the ISBA, so why would they need to be reviewed?
I think our planner's point was that if a project in the WEC, say for Sebastian, does not have a comprehensive land use change or future land use, it might not come to USAC. This is just to make sure that there's nothing that happens in the WEC happens without a USAC review.
Isn't that why it's called out as an exception and an exhibit?
Well, those are just principles in the exhibit, and I'm not trying to pick on the Sebastian one. The example I used was the Newtown under the county's ordinance. Basically, your comp plan sets the principles, but the actual Newtown goes through a zoning process to be placed there, and that's when you get the specifics on the development and where it is and all that. And I don't see a problem of giving it the review as we would other land use changes in there, but it may not get a comprehensive, it may not get a plan amendment review, but it would be at the zoning level at that time, and that's where the impacts would be looked at, rather than just the comp plan. And it depends how they implement the Newtown and these principles. And I was just using the counties as an example. We'd have to look at each of the localities and that determine what would be an appropriate review point. But I don't see a problem. As I said, Vero Beach is going to have to go through review on almost every one of its annexations. And it's just advisory review. It gives it a public hearing. You have to respond. I think something, a big Newtown is a significant item. I mean, you can adopt, say this exhibit is great, but until that Newtown comes up, then suddenly you have something tangible you have to deal with. And that's why we suggested that.
Well, I don't know how Sebastian or the county would feel about that, but I think from our point of view, we would have a problem with having anything falling under Exhibit F, then having to come to the USAC for review. That's why we have an Exhibit F.
And one of the things I think we need to be clear about is what we've excluded from the agreement, we've excluded all along. And we're almost at final stage of transmittal with DCA, so we're certainly not going to interrupt that process. And I just want to be clear because that seemed to be kind of the indication, at least from some parties earlier. And just to have a thought process about the excessive governmental regulation that has caused some of the circumstances we're currently facing, and to keep that in the back of our minds. The correlation between the regulation and the housing costs initially is skyrocketing and the subsequent crash. And I just throw that out there because it kind of boggles my mind that, I'll stop with that.
We have any more issues? We can turn it over to Wes and he can say going once, going twice. This is like a marriage. Speak up now or forever hold your peace. So obviously we're going to have another chance to speak up, but we ought to speak up now so that they can finalize the document for us and come back with all the items. And I realize, Commissioner Solari, that we're going to have to look at those circles and come up with an answer in that meeting, but that's when we can come up with an intelligent answer.
Because I did have questions on services, because it is a 20-year document. We are elected officials, and we have a group of planners. So I'm really going to ask the planners if they're comfortable with the USAC. One elected official on their annual meeting is assigned to the USAC, and all the planning regarding services, which is what the Florida statute was specific. We've kind of carved it down to heights and densities, created a USAC to talk about services, and I'd like to look at my counterparts as far as, or at least, I am curious if the planners are comfortable with us as elected officials planning their services when we come and go, and it's one from a board, and we go to a yearly meeting, and seat doesn't change, and even within your own board, you change opinions. And so I might have a different opinion as far as water, or if the county should always provide fire and ambulance. And so I'm just, I should say going once, going twice to the planners, because this is their field, and they go through the day-to-day, and we just go from elected term to elected term, and that's their specialty. So the USAC has its place, but I'm not sure for services.
I think it's time for the planners and this committee to come back to us with some kind of a consensus about what we put together here tonight. There's been a lot of discussion, but obviously there are 30 people who have to be satisfied, and that's going to be very hard to do. So there's always going to be somebody who has got a problem. But we're not going to get anywhere until we have all we've talked about put down in a document that we can look at, analyze, think about, then come on back and maybe get together again.
Are we of consensus that we have talked it out as much as we can among our boards, our commissions, councils?
Mr. Gilmore?
Yes.
I just had one question regarding the use of the word unanimous. I've heard that several times tonight, and I don't know in what context it's being used. Is that to make changes in Section 12? Is that for a vote by USAC? I just don't know. I need some explanation if we're going to change this document as to what is meant by unanimous.
You're referring to my commenting on unanimous?
You mentioned it, I think Gary mentioned it, and somebody else used the word unanimous.
And again, my concern was that in discussing it, looking at unanimous consent, and again, that takes 3 votes from each of the councils and the commission to come up with unanimous consent. Obviously, there is a possibility that the applying jurisdiction may have their own unanimous consent. But by the same token, my concern is that the adjoining municipality or the county or other sources may have some other ideas, and perhaps the way it's set up, all it's going to take is one municipality or the county commission to veto further action for approval to go forward. And I believe that we just might want to revisit that, assess it, and I believe there's room for assessment, that we might want to look at majority. I believe that a majority rule is less approachable and contaminatable by any means of special interest or otherwise. And I believe that... Excuse me?
You're talking about the majority of the consuls?
No, I meant majority of vote as far as the amount of, the makeup of the vote would be the majority of all of our councils and the commission combined, as opposed to majority rule and unanimous support of one member from each one of the councils and the commission. And I believe that a majority of all of the collective jurisdictions may be best served, best appropriate for the needs of the USAC.
To my knowledge, the only place the word unanimous appears in this document
Section 12.
in Section 12.
That's what I was referring to.
And if you're saying that in order to change any of these items in 12, it needs unanimous consent, that's in here. It's on fourth line, where is it? 5 lines down from the top, about the center of the page. But it's clearly understood that when a matter appears before the county commissioners or any city that's here, it does not require 5 votes. It's just the majority of that council that can speak on behalf of that council.
Right. To me, that's clear. And the only reason I brought it up is when Commissioner Fleischer talked about having a majority rather than unanimous. I'm looking at Section 12. I agree with the way it's written, and I support unanimous there.
Is that unanimous?
Yes, as it's written.
Do we all unanimously agree on that?
So to clarify,
my understanding on the clarification of that is when it says unanimous, I'll pick on Orchid since that's where I come from. It means 3 people out of the 5 have agreed to it, and then it means in Indian River Shores, 3 of the 5 have agreed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it means all 6 bodies have agreed to it. It doesn't mean that you had a unanimous support in each of the 6 bodies. I think that's where we're going.
Correct.
Warren.
That's my understanding.
Not that it has to be all 30 people.
No.
No.
No, we've got 6 votes.
Right.
There's 5 councils.
Right.
And 1 commission.
But he wanted
3
that-
members from each one would
But
cast that 1 vote.
I think that's the definition when you put in the word unanimous for this section, and we're really talking about height and density here. You need to put a parentheses what unanimous means, and that's what we need in this section. Needs 6 votes. It means every municipality and the county commission have to be in agreement. It does not mean that everybody voting in those municipalities or the county have to be in agreement.
And
Correct.
Councilor Dill?
I think you're illustrating a scenario, Commissioner Fleischer, where you have 5 out of the 6 parties that want to, for example, amend the map, and one municipality does not. Is that your concern?
And that's my
They would have
concern in
the-
Section 11. Thank you, Councilor, and Councilor Dill. I just want to refer to Section 11. You're stating that unanimous vote will not apply in Section 11? Where it says review provisions of this section shall apply to amendments to the comprehensive plan of any municipality that changes the FLUM.
The phrase unanimous
Any area.
agreement, the phrase unanimous agreement applies to any action that's taken from the beginning of that paragraph down to where you see unanimous agreement. Any one of those sections in there that you want to change, matter of fact, to make it easier, we put in the section number after the phrase, as required by Section 8, as required by Section 9, so you can go right to those sections and see what we're talking about. If you want to make any of those changes to any of those specific sections, it requires 6 votes, 1 from each city in the
That's
county.
correct, right.
So basically,
You're not going to have a situation where you browbeat one town. You need 6 votes to make any changes, period. That's all.
That's correct.
Yeah, across the board. Not paragraph 11 or 8 or 6 or whatever.
Well, specifically, Section 12 gives you a laundry list of the types of changes that would require all parties' unanimous consent.
Right.
Right, and then Section 11 is just the review provision, so there's no vote required there. So it does not apply to Section 11.
That's right.
I mean, and we have to have unanimous consent between the 6 parties now in order to adopt this. And I think if we've got to change it, we should have unanimous consent to change it. And it's that simple. In other words, one party, after this is adopted, has the right to veto the other 5, and by the same token, one party can decide, I don't even want to belong to this, so they don't belong to it. And we don't have a document. So that's all I'm saying. That's the way I understood it, and as Mayor Dunlap explained it, I think each body would represent one vote, and it takes a majority on that council or commission to establish how that vote will be cast.
I think when the lawyer from the League of Cities came and talked to us about this section and how we could apply this section, that was the original intent, that it would take actually a vote of 18 people to change anything, 3 out of each of the 6 municipalities. No, we weren't saying that. But we were saying, you know, this really tightens it up. And I think for those people who were in favor of charter, I think this is an alternative where we're all working together. And I think for a year and a half we've been trying to work together. And I think those of us who are here now and those who will succeed us and go on after we're long gone, hopefully they'll all work together too. And I mean, I go into this with the open eyes that we really need to work together to make this county the county it should be.
Yes, Jason.
Just a couple issues, sir. One is, if this agreement's going to be prolonged in any way, one of the things that council brought up was to address the issue of cost. After the initiation, sometime after that, we acted as the gatekeeper for that, and we've probably incurred about $30,000 in costs associated with that. And that's, you know, we did that in a good faith effort to move this item forward. We recognize our participation and its necessity. But if this is going to be moving forward longer, if we're envisioning bringing in other services or anything like that, I think you're going to see a desire from council to look at cost sharing. Perhaps another city wants to take ownership as the gatekeeper of the document and make those necessary revisions and tweaks. So I'll throw that out there for y'all's consideration. With Exhibit F, I just wanted to underscore that we will take that back, revise it, take it to council, with some finer resolution, but it is not meant to incorporate in total what comes back from DCA. So I didn't want to leave a false impression there. And then finally, one of the things we did talk about was have an ongoing staff working group. Whether elected official joins or not, that's certainly y'all's purview. My personal opinion is I think it will be helpful. I think it was very good in the school concurrency issue, and that took a long time to work out. So let's leave y'all with those final comments.
I think there's a lot of accord here. I think we're close, but I think we all would agree that we need to tweak the document a little bit, come back, have staff take and see if they can work out the documents, work out the wording, and put the wording in there that we've kind of hashed out. But I think we're all on the same page, and I think the next time we sit down, I think we should be able to have a document that comes back that we can all pretty much agree to. We could vote on, sure. Yeah.
Are we gonna put a timeline on that?
Oh, yeah. At this time, I think it'd be a good time to open it up for the public input. Yes.
Just one quick comment first. I'd like to call another meeting of the staff working group for maybe the first part of January. I'll coordinate with everyone. We'll go over, revise the document according to your comments tonight, and have somebody present the concentric circles of the Newtown issue. And I think staff will come up with its recommendation. And then if Sebastian wants to host another meeting like this, we'll give you what we hope is the final working document with our recommendation for the concentric circles, although you can change it in any way you want. And at that meeting, you could actually adopt the final version, subject to each council and the county commission separately voting on it. So we would meet sometime in early January after the holidays, as soon as we are all ready. Right, and that'll be a public meeting, same as always, at the City of Vero Beach, and the planners will all be there and discuss all those issues.
Okay.
Suggestion, could we make up a deadline, like the 15th of January?
I don't have my calendar, but I'm certain we could meet by then. Bob?
That's for the work group, to meet by the 15th.
Yeah.
And if we do that, then can we come up with a consensus from the elected officials that we could meet by February 15th?
Yep.
When is DCA?
When is DCA?
Don't you need to wait until after DCA gets back with their comments?
We'll be transmitting at the end of this week. If it's the desire to take what's ultimately approved by DCA and use that as the basis for inclusion, then yeah, we would need to wait 45 days from the 18th. But that would be assuming compliance. If we go into a settled agreement, that could be any time frame. We could be before an administrative law judge. We could be looking at a year out. I'm assuming that nobody wants to get that heavily engaged in a process. I think that we've gone to great lengths to address their comments. We've had multiple meetings with DCA staff, Secretary Pelham. I feel like where we are now is much further than we were before. If that provides y'all comfort level, that's great. If y'all want to take a pause until we get through the DCA process, my recommendation would be to council that we not meet in the interim so as not to run up basically unnecessary bills.
Just a quick comment from my perspective, having watched this process and been involved with the Fellsmere issue from beginning to eventual end. I believe we do need to wait till it comes back from DCA because of past experience with submittals and what comes back. I want to know, and I want it to match. And I think the loopholes need to be out of there. If we pass something and it's in our agreement, that always leaves it open when you come back going, no, we agreed to this, and DCA, it doesn't matter. We agreed to this, and this is what we're going to do. I am not comfortable with that at all, because what went to DCA the first time was not in the spirit of what we sat down here to do. So I want to see it in writing when it comes back, done and approved by DCA.
If you want to wait until we get a response from DCA, that's fine, but I would suggest then that there would be no point for the staff working group to meet prior to that, because the main issue everybody seems to have is Exhibit F.
There were those other little stickler words, but either way, whatever staff's comfortable with. There were 5 or 6 other issues that we've directed they deal with.
Look, just for my benefit, on personal edification there, I got about 6 issues. The Sebastian contiguity deal, the Fellsmere F, the poison pill home rule, the rewrite for the extension language, and then the Newtown. So there's like 3 or 4 things that we can get hammered on before Fellsmere. So I think it's important that we do meet that first week in January.
So I would still suggest that we need to have a time certain for the elected officials to meet, because as we left it at the last elected officials meeting, we would be meeting in 60 days. I think it's been like 90 or over days since then.
Why don't we give that until March then? Is that okay?
March
for the elected officials?
March 15th, prior to March 15th.
Yeah, no,
that's 90 days. That's 90 days.
All right. I guess the best thing, is that when Charlie meets with the planners and the city managers, once they get these things ironed out that we talked about tonight, and then they can give us a time certain then when this board should meet, because they'll have it all put together. Right now, it would be a little bit early for us to set a date.
Right. I think Al is right. We need to meet early January, iron out the 6 issues as best we can. There might be some issue still with Exhibit F and the concentric circles, but I think that meeting's important before we forget what happened here.
Okay. Commissioner Wheeler?
Yeah, a question of Jason. It's not clear to me, Jason, what you were saying when you talked about the gatekeeper and $30,000 in cost sharing. Could you be specific?
What we did is
on that?
it became cumbersome for multiple iterations of the document to be floating around. So we took ownership of the document. Our city attorney has been doing all the edits, and that's a time-consuming process. And Warren, along with being good, isn't cheap. And that's not, I'm not putting him on the spot. He's aware of that. If the city of Sebastian wants to take ownership of the document, that'd be fine. Or if one of the other cities does, that we have no issue with that.
Charlie's raising his hand.
Okay. I suggest we extend our time frames.
Thank you, Jason.
I just want, the cities have worked together for like 15 months, and really, I think every elected official here should be proud of the staffs they have working. We've all worked well together. We've never before in my 20-some years here have ever worked this closely on an issue, and what came out of it was a lot better than any one or two cities or the county could have thought up on its own. And we split up tasks, and the county did some, Bob Keating did a lot, and Will's office, and Felsmer did. Warren did a yeoman's job keeping track of all the changes. He's a nitpicker and a note-taker, and he was the best one to do that. But the document's so far along, I think Vero Beach would be happy to take it over and do the copying and all those other costs. I want to thank
anybody
Warren
else
for his help.
want to take that away from Vero Beach, or I don't see any takers, so I think you've got it. Any other comments before we open this up to public comment? Okay, let's open it up to public comment. Anyone from the public would like to comment about this? Yes. Yeah.
Honey News with the Indian River Neighborhood Association. I'd like to really comment on Charlie's comments because we're very impressed with the process that has gone through, and the staff has been diligent and they have certainly represented their governments very well. We felt very strongly about the USAC being an advisory capacity, requiring a review before those comp changes. But we also do have another recommendation which we really ask you to consider, and that's with the new towns. When they're being considered, we feel very strongly that the anchor tenant should be identified and contracted with prior to any adoption being granted. We feel that this is going to assure the commercial and the industrial aspects of the new towns, and that it will ensure some economic vitality, which is very, very necessary in today's times. And we also feel that when that tenant is identified, that it will enhance the marketing effects of the residential components. So we ask your consideration on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else from the public? Yes, sir.
Okay. My name is Mike Ray, and I live in Vero Beach, and I was a little late getting here. I represent and work with the Gray's family, which I guess was a subject of conversation early on that I missed most of, but I've been involved in some of the meetings and met with some of the staff to work on this document. I think it's important that everybody understand that this document has a lot of intentions, a lot of hard effort in it, a lot of good work in it, but it still has ambiguities in it that can cause the document to be read in a number of different ways. I would just challenge everybody during this kind of waiting period between now and whenever the next meeting is, and whenever staff gets together to work through the rest of the issues and points that y'all have raised here tonight, is to go back and consider if you wanted to do something in your own municipality, could you do it without unanimous approval as defined here, which I think everybody understood that's what unanimous approval was. To think that somewhere down the road that 6 municipalities are always going to walk down the yellow brick road together and be in harmony on what is best for their municipality relative to the rest of the community, I think is a stretch. And I think as you look to see what your community needs or desires are, or what your vision for Sebastian or Fellsmere or even Orchid is somewhere in the future, if there is something there that you want to do, and think about it now, and then go back to the document and see if you're going to be allowed to do that in the best interest of your community without the unanimous approval of this entire group. I think that's an important item. I have issues whether you do this for 20 years or 30 years or 10 years to commit future councils or future commissions to not be able to make any modification at all to whatever this document ends up being is pretty strong. And in conversations with staff, whatever is written in this document, whatever is attached as an exhibit, as written, is in stone. It cannot be changed. It cannot be modified. It cannot be subject to discussion. It is as written unless you get unanimous consent to change any aspect of that document. If that's the case, I would just challenge you to go back and think about what you might like to do in your community that would cause a land use change or a text amendment to something that's already in existence to modify a business aspect that you would like to come to your community and do, and then see if you can do it. As an example, let's just say for argument's sake that Dodgertown was in the county and not in the city. And a group came in and wanted to do something that required you to make a land use change to the document. And for whatever reason, Mayor Pelham doesn't want to do it. Even though it might be in the absolute best interest of the community to do so, they just don't want to do it. Don't need a reason not to do it. All they need is 3 votes that says no. Now, I only use that as an example, but that's what the document allows you to do. Stop everything. It absolutely allows you to stop everything. It's a document that allows you to vote against instead of develop a vision for. So I would just suggest that if you have a chance, go back and think about what you might want to do within your district, within your municipality, and then see how that plays out with the document. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Is there anyone else from the, yes, would you comment on that, please?
What Michael Ray said is not totally accurate. You would have a unanimous approval requirement only if you were changing the comp plan for land outside the urban service area. That's a major difference. That's the whole point of this agreement. Annexing land within the urban service area and in your reserve area does not require unanimous approval, even though some of the large-scale annexations will be reviewed by USAC. They're advisory reviews only.
The other
You
thing
agree
is,
with me, right?
as I understand the document, it also provides for review after 5 years. Is that not correct? And so it's a living document to a certain extent. If it needs to be changed, tweaked down the road, we're making allowances for that, as I understand it. So if something needed to be changed in the document, it's not like it's cast in stone for 20 years. 5 years out, there's going to be a review. Anyone else from the public? Yes, sir.
My name is Joseph Paladin. I'm the president of Black Swan Consulting. On the unanimous part, which is the question I would like to comment on, what Mike Ray said is partially what bothers me. But it's all been talked about one municipality objecting. How about if we went just a step back and we allowed for one vote, not to stop everything? Because, if there's 2 or 3, it gives it more credibility. But if only one municipality was against it, how about we allow for that and allow for one municipality to object and have it still go forward? You're talking about 5 out of 6. That's more than a supermajority. So I would suggest that would give more credibility to the vote if one municipality couldn't stop the whole process, because it's hard for me to believe that one municipality could be right and everybody else could be wrong. Just a suggestion.
Thank you, sir. Anyone else from the public? Seeing none? I think we're pretty much in consensus that we will now allow staff to meet sometime in January, sometime before the 15th, that summing up that we will also are agreed that sometime before March 15th that this body will convene again and hopefully have a document that we can all vote on. So anything else before we adjourn? Yes, sir.
I think the date will be January 14th at 1:30 in the City of Vero Beach City Council.
January 14th?
We always meet on a Wednesday at around 1:30, so I think if the staff doesn't object to that time, we'll announce it to the public now.
Okay.
And so you'll have your report from us by the 15th.
Anything else? I guess we stand adjourned.